Prentis Hemphill is a teacher, a writer, an embodiment coach, and someone who is deeply experienced with social justice and the work that we do in our own body, somatic healing, as well as in community with each other. We spoke about dignity, integrity, and their own sense of, I am here and I don't need to diminish my light. I really enjoyed this conversation and hope you do too. This is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. I'm so delighted today to be talking with Prentis Hemphill and to learn a little bit about your work. Maybe we could start there. Could you talk a little bit about healing justice and the kind of work you do? And in particular, I'm really interested in how you bring the somatics into it and just a little bit about who you are and what kind of work you do.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Len. It's really good to be with you. Yeah, I'll try to say a little bit about those things because there's a lot that can be said. My work really came out of a question, and the question is, what does it really take for us to heal? And I started my work as an organizer where that wasn't really the central question. I was doing community organizing work and still do community organizing work, but a lot of what drove us was thinking about structural change and building power in our communities, things that I find still very, very important when you think about what change is and what it will take for us to heal. But it wasn't explicitly a conversation. Healing wasn't explicitly a conversation at the time that I was doing community organizing work. And so I started to pursue therapy. I'm becoming a psychotherapist. And in a way, to start to answer these questions I had about trauma, because it seems so pervasive. At the same time, I found gratefully an organization that was doing somatics work, somatic healing work, and doing it from uh, a framework of social change. So I came up through the work of generative somatics and the teachers there at that time in the kind of early 2000s, and was looking at healing in a political context, understanding how trauma is distributed throughout a society, and thinking about change and healing very fundamentally through the body and in the body, experience through the body. And all of that together really has led me into the work that I'm doing now, the work that I've been doing. A lot of my application has been in social change work, particularly Black movement building work, and supporting leaders and organizers to um, do the healing work and the transformation work and the deep change work inside of ourselves and also in our communities and rippling out into the larger world. So, my current work, I started a project called the Embodiment Institute, and we are creating spaces where we can heal and transform together, and especially towards the kind of relationships that we feel like create the foundation of a more just world and society. And I have a podcast called Finding Our Way, where we talk to people who I think are kind of on the edge or the cusp of really having kind of the embodied wisdom that I think we need for the moment, or at least having the provocative questions that I think kind of compel us forward. So that's a lot of how I spend my time these days.
So yeah, there's a lot there too that we could go into.
Yeah.
So when you look at embodiment, one of
Mm.
the things that happens with trauma is that we disconnect from ourselves and each other. So how is it that you could you talk a little bit more about that? How do you work with trauma, connection, the safety, all of those components that come along with that?
Oh yeah, that's a big question. What I'll say is that just like you said, reiterating what you said, that embodiment, I'll say trauma breaks down our capacity for safety, belonging, and dignity, our experiences of those safety, belonging, and dignity. And we can say that and we can hear those words, but those are actually felt experiences that we have in our body. I have a 3 month old, as I was kind of sharing with you before we started recording. And part of my task as her parent is to help her feel safe, to feel like she belongs with us, even when she messes up somehow in the future. to make sure that she's maintaining a sense of dignity, that that's part of what it means for me to parent her, because it's such a fundamental aspect of being a human being, and it's felt, it is experienced. So when we are doing somatic work or embodiment work and the work of healing trauma and restoring these capacities, our measurement is felt. So I think that's one thing that I think makes embodiment work really distinct, is that we can understand the concept well enough,
Right.
but to actually allow our bodies to feel safe. And sometimes, because of the way trauma has operated in our lives, we can be in a scenario that we might otherwise assess as safe, but our body is unable to experience or let in the safety, or our bodies resist being the safety around us. So I think embodiment, somatics gives us opportunities to almost practice feeling into these new ways of being, understanding where maybe in proximity with other human beings we start to feel unsafe, or we worry that we don't belong, and we practice into new ways of being. And I mean experientially, we do different things with our bodies to evoke a different set of feelings and to move through or activate certain feelings. So simply put, for me, the work of healing trauma, or the work of um, yeah, addressing trauma in any way, is about restoring these felt senses in the body. And I think when we talk about healing on a social level or societal level, it's about creating more conditions where more people can have these experiences more often.
So, what would that look like in if you're working with an organization or a group of people? What would that look like to help? Because so many people are not really in their bodies. It's hard for us to be in our body if we're afraid or we're activated the way so many of us are these days. What would that look like?
Yeah. I mean, first, whenever you're working with a person or a group, the first step is really to begin to turn up our sensations, turn up our awareness that we are having sensations, which, when I was taught somatics, sensations are the language of the body. Um, I think words too can be the language of the body, but it's one way of thinking about how often sensations are occurring in us and how much culturally we've been taught to turn down the volume on our sensations, to be who we should be or act the way we should act, as opposed to knowing who we actually are and what we actually feel, and allowing that to inform then what we do. A lot of times we are ahead acting on top of a body that's having so many sensations and responses to what's happening in the world or what's happening inside of us. So the first step is really to support people in becoming more awake to the sensations that are happening inside of them, and start to connect the sensations to the meaning we might make of a situation we're in, or a story in our past, that we're starting to create these connections, that our sensations mean something, are trying to take care of something, are trying to express something about us. So that's the anchor, knowing that you are a body that is alive and responding and lives inside of an environment. And then the other pieces just kind of build on that. Some of the work I do, the foundation is, how do we be in connection with one another? How do we tolerate? Sounds like such a limiting word, but in a way, how do we tolerate connection? How do we tolerate feeling the aliveness of another person? How do we tolerate letting another person witness our aliveness? It can be as simple as facing one another, and in person, we would put a hand on each other's chest and just be with and feel the heartbeat, feel the skin change, feel the breath quicken or deepen, and then allow that to happen without becoming overwhelmed by it or without blocking it out, but that we can kind of enter this field of mutuality that actually allows for real connection and intimacy, and is part of what it means to belong. We have to be able to feel the aliveness in another person and also allow our aliveness to be here too. So that's one example of a very simple practice that I think starts to bring us into the possibilities of embodiment.
Mm. And thinking back to when I was really involved in activist groups, and there was a lot going on under the surface, but nobody was really talking about any of that or doing anything that would connect us. We had a common enemy.
Yeah.
Uh, so we were kind of angry and fighting against that. But this is a whole different approach. And I
Yeah.
love that quote that you have on your website from Audre Lorde
Yeah.
about becoming tender with each other. It's very different.
Yeah, it's what I love about that quote, the Audre Lorde quote, comes from a poem of hers. Is she says we have to practice being tender with each other until it becomes habit. And I think that quote to me sums up somatics work or embodiment work, because change is not something that just happens one day. Like, I
Right.
want to be an open person. I'm going to be open tomorrow. That we
Right.
practice it over time, and that's how it becomes habit in our bodies. So it to me, embedded in there is a kind of compassion for ourselves and for each other, that this work of change actually takes effort and may take time for us to get there. And I think the piece around, like, organizer and activist circles, those have been some of the most deeply loving and beautiful places for me. And I think that when we aren't in the practice of coming to know ourselves, that's the same, how do I say it? That's exactly what can start to break us down, break our organizations down, break our
Yeah.
relationships down, where we are unknown to ourselves, where we're mostly defending ourselves from each other, from critique or feedback, or even from risk. That those are the places where I think our power actually gets dissipated, it gets lost. So the degree to which we are in a practice of coming to know ourselves and each other, I think that is what builds our power over time. Builds, if we're able to maintain that connection we were talking about, even through rough patches and even through hard things, if we're able to come back to each other, that's what builds power over time, not being perfect over time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So when you're working with um, people from different kind of ends of the power structure, so to speak, so you have some people that are really benefiting from the structure, some people who are wanting to disrupt that. Do you work with disparate groups of people like that? Can you talk about what that process is like? How is it possible sometimes it feels to even connect people on some kind of a human level?
I wish I had an answer in a way. I have
Mhm.
experiments. I don't think I have an answer. Um, Even if we exist on different positions, say on a spectrum of power, um, there are losses all along that spectrum.
Mhm.
And I think, especially when a person or a group of people have had a concentration of power or access, um, there's then a fear of belonging to the rest of everything,
Right.
a fear of belonging to the rest of human beings or to the rest of the world. There's a kind of calcifying around a specialness or an exceptionalism, that is its own break. There's its own thing that has to be, I think, um, healed from. That doesn't mean that those folks maybe carry the weight or the brunt of collective trauma, but it means there is something that has been skewed. And I think around belonging is a anxiety or a fear of what will be lost in order to belong to everything, to belong with um, the rest of us. And I think all of us can have this sense, because all of us have, you can take two people look exactly the same, and they're gonna be positioned differently on a spectrum of power. So I think there's, for each of us, there's a place for us to investigate, what are we afraid to lose. I think in the scenario of having more power or privilege, what are we afraid to lose to belong? Um, and I think practically, I just say it like this. I think part of what gets trained in us somatically is about our own personal lives around trauma, but it's also about how the world expects each of us to be given our position. We each have habits, ways of being that are cultural, and some of what is cultural to us has to do with power and maintaining power. Some of the ways that we are with each other, some of the ways that we move, some of the ways we interact with each other have something to do with maintaining, if not power, stasis, maintaining things as they are. And so whenever we come into space together with all of this true, it's so much to hold. It goes back to that point around practice. Ask of us is to be practicing different things, not behaving in the kind of rote or expected or easy ways with one another, but to try new things in new contexts and be willing to be wrong and mess up. And to create, I think, a culture or a space where it is okay to mess up, but it is not okay to stay in the same place as you mess up. It's not okay. So I think that's some of it. In my facilitation, it's like, how do I make this expectation clear? And also, I can be in my own facilitation somewhat disruptive to the status quo. I was telling somebody recently, I will interrupt people or I will ask a question that says, when was the last time you listened to somebody else in this group? Because some of us can get so used to being heard,
Right.
or maybe we spend a lifetime being heard or being listened to. And our listening skills are not on par with our skills of expressing how we feel. Some of that has to do with training. Some of it has to do with how the world trains men, or how the world trains white people, or how the world trains people with money, or whatever the context. It's like you are valued and therefore your voice is valued, and so other people can get trained out of talking or into hesitation. So it's like encouraging people out of that and also encouraging people to up their listening. That is a skill. It's a
Mm.
deep skill. So yeah, I just try to be a loving troublemaker in my facilitation too, to disrupt power dynamics, and sometimes I get it wrong, and so I have to be open to that too.
Hmm. So let's go a little bit more deeply into that listening. So that's one of the things that I work with too with people is to really encourage people to listen in their body. So if we're tying it back to somatics, what are some of the ways that you might work with people to encourage them, in addition to saying, if you normally talk, maybe
Yeah,
by listening for a while, because so many times we're not even aware of what's going on in our body. So just to notice, oh, I'm holding my breath now, or I'm tensing up, or something like that can be new.
absolutely. I mean, I feel like what you're saying is breath is a great indicator of who we are in that moment. I think I think about breath almost like how we digest emotions or how we digest information. Breath helps us carry it through ourselves, even when I'm doing a practice of addressing something inside of me or a loving kindness practice or something. That my breath helps me carry this sensation through. If you're stopping your breath, you're doing that to stop feeling. If you're making your breath shallow, it's so that whatever might be bubbling in your stomach or whatever kind of tension or feeling you might have in your solar plexus, that doesn't get activated or isn't felt too deeply. That's why we shallow our breath. Um, I mean, we shallow our breath also if we have asthma or running, but in an emotional sense, we shallow our breath to restrict feeling.
Right.
And if we deepen our breath, you're going to feel a lot more. You're going to feel all types of things that are waiting for you. You're going to feel tingles. You're going to maybe feel pain. There's a lot of content when we really allow our breath. So I think in terms of listening, there seems to me to be a correlation between deep listening and deep breath. And so when someone is sharing, can I breathe in what they're saying? Can I allow it to be? Even if it activates, notice where it activates you. Oh, it activated me there. You don't have to go running after the activation, but we can notice it and allow it. And I think that is truly an indicator of kind of how much we're able to receive another is through our breath.
So that's a powerful practice and a powerful pointer for people to be aware of the breath. Oftentimes, when I ask people what's going on with their breath, they go, "Oh, I'm holding my breath."
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
seems to be kind of a universal response. Something's hard. I'm just going to
yeah.
resist that. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. But isn't it cool? I always say I think it's cool that our breath, it has a, it's that's a machine word, so I feel hesitant to use it, but it's automatic. It's automated. It happens without you thinking about it. But at
Mhm.
the same time, we have this consciousness. We can also work with the muscles of the breath to slow it down or deepen it or open up in some places. Um, it's just always so cool to me that it's like your breath will kind of do its thing, but we also are able to look at or witness our breath and shift it or make it more comfortable or open it up. There's things we can consciously do to shift our breath too, and I'm so grateful for that.
Mhm. Mhm. So the people that you work with, are they mostly willing to do this work, or or is there more resistance?
I've encountered a lot of resistance in my days, but these days people are more so they've chosen to come do it. I've definitely worked with organizations, and people have been like, 80% of people will be on board, and 20% of people will be like, "This is weird."
Mhm.
And I still have people come into a course or an event, and even if they have chosen to be there, they're also still bringing their resistance to it. So yeah, I still encounter resistance, and I've encountered a lot of. Uh, to me, people should be choiceful. You should choose. It may not be the doorway for you right now, So if it isn't, that's okay. Uh,
Right.
but then sometimes people want you to engage their resistance too, and um, understand more about where that comes from or what it's trying to take care of.
So I'm thinking right now with COVID and so much polarization, and a lot of it is within families,
Yeah.
within communities. How does that work? Are you working with people around that, or how would you kind of talk about that? What's going on there?
So like political polarization.
Yeah, and also just the kind of the hardening of our positions, and
Mm.
no real connection or compassion for the humanity of people on the other side, so to speak.
This is interesting for me because, in a way, I absolutely align. I feel like we're in a frighteningly polarized time, and where it's both like people are positioned on opposite sides of things, but people have also are almost refusing nuance.
Mhm.
And so I want to hold that there for a second. I'll come back to that. But at the same time, things have been polarized for a long time.
Right.
And I think where the lines are, this is some element. I don't think this is the whole story. But I think people are surprised by where the lines are, that they exist in their families now. But I think where the lines have been at other points in our history have been okay. Like they've been less disruptive, the breaks. Like segregation is a gigantic break between a
Right.
population of people living on the same land. That is extremely polarizing. But when certain people are allowed full humanity and certain people are not allowed full humanity, the polarization doesn't look so intense because there's so much power over. I think now we're seeing something different it is more disruptive to the way things have been, but it is not the only time I've seen us polarized. I think we've been polarized for quite a long time. The lines are drawn differently and inconveniently and in a really disruptive way right now. Well, here's the thing. If we're looking at that historically, there's some things that have been allowed that are just unjust, in my opinion. That there are things that we do have to say very plain. There are lines that we do have to draw very clearly.
Mhm.
Not everything requires a kind of compassion on all sides. I think there are certain issues where we are in a question of who is fully human or not. And
Right.
those questions, um, I think, require very clear answers. I also think that there is sometimes a simplifying of the way that we have conversations. It has to do with our reactionary selves. A lot of us are in a reactive state
Mhm.
related to our trauma, related to the culture that we live in, but we're in a reactive state that doesn't allow for nuance. And I think that sometimes people confuse nuance and thinking that nuance means that the lines are blurred or that nothing is clear. I think that nuance allows for precision. When you look deeply into something, when you allow all the colors to come in and show you the picture, you can get more precise about what it is that you see and what it is that you believe. But right now, our reactive self is shutting out more information. And I think that that is our argument. It doesn't strengthen what we have to do. I think nuance, softening into our nuance, centering into our nuance, allows us to be more precise about where the lines need to be drawn and how, and what it is that what's actually at stake here, what we're actually doing. So, um, yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with reactivity and our kind of narrowing of the field of tolerance for so many people.
Mhm. So when we're working with reactive nervous systems, those people cannot, they probably don't feel safe either, but they can be unsafe to be around. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think what you're pointing to is that reactivity. It's like it brings into the question. It brings the question of safety. Am I safe? What am I willing to do to be safe? That's the motivating question. That's the only question that really is allowed space when you are in a reactive state.
Mhm.
What am I going to do to be safe? And there's not a lot that can really happen other than protection, defensiveness, um, and violence, I think, from that state.
Right. So when we're talking about a question of are some people fully human,
Hmm.
that's not a place where we're going to negotiate something and come
Yeah,
to a center point somewhere.
yeah,
There's a yes or no answer to that.
that's right.
So
That's right.
so when we're working with that, and I've experienced that as a lesbian too. I've had people to my face say, "You're going to burn in hell. You shouldn't
Right.
exist."
Yeah,
And clearly they don't see me as a human being. And a lot of people of color are not seen as full human beings. Resma Menachem talks a lot about that as well.
yeah,
And so what do we do in that situation? You know, and I'm thinking a little bit about my own family in terms of having conversations with them around, okay, I'm a lesbian and you're voting for a politician who would deny me my human rights. So that's one kind of in the family example. And they're like, well, get off my back. I don't have any problem with you, but they're not really seeing, some of
yeah,
the ramifications of that. And then I just feel like, well, um, I feel a distance there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I resonate with that story, and I think what's coming up for me is that I don't feel I'm not going to convince anyone I'm a human. So I feel that really strongly inside of myself.
Mhm.
Um, Because if I'm trying to convince you that I'm a human, I've conceded that you are a decider of who is human, and that already places you above me.
Right.
I I think the struggle we are in to define humanity in a way is a very significant one. I think the parameters through which human beings have defined themselves have been narrowed and narrowed and narrowed over time, to the point that we struggle to relate within our ecosystem, we struggle to relate within our species. And I think that there are people who are willing to radically redefine what a human being is altogether. And I think that's an important pursuit in this moment. For me, a human being, and it's not a definition that human beings have never had, but I think the fact that we're all together and interfacing with each other. I think about my ancestors, and there was likely never a doubt who they were until colonization
Hmm.
created this context that reminded them daily that they weren't human enough for this context. Before that, there was never a question. That wasn't the question. Colonization created that question, because colonization was trying to make some humans useful to the project of other human beings. So it created these classes, or in its imagination, identified people as subhuman or human adjacent almost, for the project of uh, accumulating wealth on the backs of those humans, and to protect themselves psychically and emotionally from feeling what they were doing,
Right.
because they had already figured out how to um, psychically and emotionally create a space where animals were object, where trees were object. And so it was one other step to say these humans that are different than me are a kind of object too, a kind of human object. That pleading to that logic will never work, because the person who is considering, their concept of human is not a concept of human that I'm interested in. Their framework for human, their choice about how to be a human is not actually one that I'm interested in. And so I think it's really important for the lot of us, as many people as are interested in the question, to redefine that, to create parameters that are decolonial, because the colonial parameters are deadly to many human beings and to many animals and to the planet. So I think that we are engaged in, on the cusp of a redefinition that I hope brings us into a different kind of relationship in the ecosystem and with each other.
Yeah, that really makes sense. Hmm. And we have to be kind of careful who we give that power to define our humanity, or whether it's our gender, or all of these different components of who we are. And we can't really know who we are if we're just up in our head. We're
Yeah,
subject to our conditioning. And
that's right. That's right. Yeah, you can't really know how powerful you are. You can't really know what power is if you can't actually feel yourself.
mhm, mm.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's possible for everybody to do this, to get to know ourselves and to really be connected within, and to develop our own humanity? Well, it's not quite the right word, but
Hmm.
feel it's possible.
In a way, yes. I mean, in a way, I think that it has been possible in the past. I think it's a question of culture. I think it's a question of values. I think it's a question of what is humanity about? Um, and in a way, I mean, there's also a way that I think, no, no, I, I don't think everybody will engage these questions because our reactive states are powerful for our
Hmm.
survival. And I think that the our reactive states in these recent years have proven um, lucrative, I would say. For I think there's a section of our society that has figured out how to capitalize on people's reactivity and and their trauma, and I think that that creates a very significant barrier for the types of reimagining and redefining and restructuring work that is necessary for us right now. I think it's an incredible um, barrier. I think, I mean, obviously, we're living in a time when people are ready to, at least in the country I live in, are ready to really fight one another, to kill one another
Right.
behind a very narrow set of political beliefs. But it's about their own safety and their fear that by changing their idea of what this country is will disappear them somehow because they're unwilling to change their self concept, to update it to this moment. So, yeah, I don't think it will just all, we'll all get it. I think it will be hard won. It will be hard won.
Hmm. So when we're looking at our own individual work around this, it's really helpful to have people who get it,
Yeah,
who we can work with.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. We need to keep connecting to one another, keep doing this work of transformation and remembering how it connects up to this world making work that we're also doing. But being in community, when we talk about healing trauma, we said safety, belonging, and dignity, it's important for us to be together, to be connected to one another as we are transforming. That is healing. That's why organizing work has been healing for me, because it's reclaiming my agency with others, doing things with others, learning relational skills with other people. Um, yeah, I think we need each other. It's not enough to do this by ourselves and alone. We need connection.
Hmm. So the word dignity is an interesting one that I don't hear very often. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that I hold it is a kind of, I think it has a couple components. Dignity is a kind of integrity. I I am here. All of me gets to be here. We talk somatically about how through the trauma of oppression, our dignity can be kind of assaulted, and some of us might physically express that through kind of dropping our center line or dropping our eyes or, you know, looking at the floor. If you ever heard anybody say chin up, keep your head
Mm.
up, that's about maintaining a kind of, I get to be here. Now, I think that sometimes we think that the only way to feel a sense of I get to be here is that I got to be bigger than you. I get to be here more than you.
Right.
But still, there's I feel like it's common knowledge that in that kind of puffing up is an insecurity. Can I maintain this structurally? Can I stay puffed up and above? Do I have to spend my time trying to diminish other people whose lights are trying to shine? That in a kind of puffed up dignity is a preoccupation with dimming other people's lights. But dignity to me, somatically, is like, I don't have to puff up, I don't have to hide, and I am here. All of me is here. I don't have to disappear it. I don't have to prove it. Even if you don't see it, even if you can't see me as I am, my dignity can be can remain intact, because it's not actually about you witnessing or giving me that approval. It's that I know that I'm here. And that's been kind of my saving grace in a way over the years, is having that sense inside of myself that even if the world can't hear me, I grew up in a town that I felt like I was talking about things and around race and gender and sexuality, and nobody knew what I was talking about at the time. I mean, many things have changed, but I felt really alone. But I had this sense of dignity, the sense of like, even if I used to joke that I would sound like Charlie Brown teachers when I would talk about things like the want, 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 because it would just be like, I
Right.
don't understand what you're talking about. This doesn't make sense to me. And I could have internalized it as something is wrong with me. And I think that would have diminished something, would have dimmed something. It would have taken something from me,
Hmm.
internalized my wrongness. But I was like, oh no, I think this might have something to do with the context. I think this might have something to do with the what I'm saying activates people and they don't want to feel it. And at any rate, I'm going to be myself. Even if I'm alone, even if no one understands what I'm talking about, I always felt connected to my concept of a higher being. And so to me, that relationship said, you are just as here or real or valuable as anybody else. Human beings create these hierarchies of worth, but your worth actually beyond human delusion isn't measurable. Who's going to measure it? What scale measures your worth? It doesn't exist. We create them,
Right.
make believe.
Some people say, I get to do that. You don't. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So once I realized that that was all a sham, it was like there's something I get to hold on to. I don't have to disappear myself, even if even if I mess up, even
Hmm.
if I'm wrong, even if you don't see me, even if I still am here. Disappearing is not going to make my mistakes better.
Right. That's pretty unusual. There's not that many people have that level of awareness and kind of confidence. What's your sense of why you're able to hold that dignity and that integrity?
I think there's two parts of me. On my desk right now are pictures of my ancestors looking
Mm.
at me as I'm talking to you.
Mhm.
And that, I'm looking at my great great grandmother who worked in white folks' home in Shreveport, Louisiana. Was I think the first one born out of slavery, but still essentially spent her whole life in people's homes caring for their children, even though she had her own. I feel her dignity when I look at her. I feel her center when I look at her, and I carry her inside of me. And I think if she could hold on to a sense of who she was in that context, in that world, even if she couldn't, she, I know, prayed that I might be able to.
Right.
I know that she prayed that I might be able to. So, what do I look like not doing that? What do I look like diminishing my light? I mean, where I come from, my people saying this little light of mine in the church. And I always say that is a profound message. If you really listen to it, that is a profound message that they pass on to us. I'm going to let it shine. No matter what, they give you all the things that might turn your light out, but I'm still going to let it shine. That to me is spiritual technology that they pass down to me through their songs. And so I do that because I am them. My dignity is their dignity. Um, and I also think, just kind of what I shared earlier, that where I grew up in a town in Texas, and um, I think it could make you self hating not to have any evidence that your life was worthy or that you could make an impact in the world. There was a lot that was put, a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff, especially as a Black, queer, poor kid.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what those places, what they don't know is that those same contexts that might put out your light is the same context that can keep your light glowing through anything after that is, it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy after that. So if you can figure out how to keep it on in that context,
Right.
you're good.
Yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, and then you can take that strength and that knowing into everything else.
You spread the good word. That's what, I grew up, you spread the good word. You spread the good word. And I'm not a practicing Christian, but there are elements of the language that to me are about how my ancestors put freedom into these concepts. So to me, you cultivate your own center, you cultivate your own light, and not to just bask in it, but to spread it, to activate other people's light. That's what I'm here to do, at least, and maybe many of us are.
Mm. Wow, this is amazing, Prentis. I'm really happy that we got to talk, and it's almost time to finish. But
Yeah,
before I do, though, how would people get a hold of you if they're interested in your work? I know you have a podcast. You've got a great website. Do you want to just say a few ways that people could get in touch?
absolutely. You can get in touch with me through my website, prentishemphill.com. My organization's website is theembodimentinstitute.org. We are very active on Instagram, both my personal Instagram, which is at Prentis Hemphill. The Embodiment Institute has an Instagram, and Finding Our Way podcast has an Instagram and a website. So Finding Our Way and Finding Our Way podcast on Instagram too.
Oh, that's great. And they could read one of your quotes in a Brene Brown book.
It's true. Yeah, I actually was in a number of books this year. So was in Brene Brown's most recent book, Atlas of the Heart, and also the collaboration she did with Tarana Burke, You Are Your Best Thing, and a book by Adrienne Marie Brown that came out this year. And I'm working on my own right now. So that's taking up a lot of time.
Ah, right. Well, thank you again for taking the time to be here, and I'm really excited that we were able to talk and connect. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I love the questions. I appreciate the connection.
This is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit. We have an exciting lineup for our 5th annual, including Dr. Gabor Maté as our keynote speaker. Head on over to radicalrecoverysummit.com to learn more and watch the interviews.